About a year ago, I started a project, Italeri's 35th scale RSO, which is the ancient Peerless Max kit, reboxed by Italeri into testers in the 70s and 80s. And I've been using it as a demo piece here for the live streams, just painting red primer and panzer gray and what to do with it and kind of how to approach that process. Using Mission Models paints in particular is kind of the new kid on the block, and a lot of people have questions about it. So I show them more often in the live streams. And then I talk a lot about the red primer color and what I like to do with it. I tend to lighten up my red primers quite a bit now versus how I painted red primer, 5 or 6 years ago. And a lot of that is because of the color theory of, using a little bit of a lighter tone underneath. And some of these other kind of changes to my processes is probably going to stand out quite a bit differently to others in the hobby that paint a lot of black and darks underneath. And you can see here on the screen, when I get the airbrush kind of refocus on here, the old original process I was using, that red primer there's pretty strong in the panzer gray. The problem with that is it's a really low contrast between the two. And this will affect your chipping later on. In other words, you're not going to really see it too much. But what I needed to do was I had to replace the back axle. So let's get this down with some new red primer. And the reason I've chosen kind of a lighter shade is because that plastic color, that really dark NATO black kind of gray green color that Italeri is using, it's hard for red to prime over that. In fact, it's probably smarter if you wanted to use a red, go really light. And then I showed the guys how I kind of prep and clean my airbrush when I'm done spraying a primer and how I get that needle seated in there. And what I'm doing, I'm just tapping that gently just to make sure it's seated properly, tighten it down. And then I wanted to get some panzer gray on top of this. And I'm just making a simple, straight out of the bottle mix. I thin it down about 20%. And just to reinforce for you guys how that works, I watched the runoff on the cup there. That's really kind of what I'm looking forward to. And then what I'm trying to do here is just basically throw down some really thin, light, wet coats at first. And that lets the paint bite into that primer. This is how you build up the strength of this system. A lot of times guys will either spray from too far away or you'll flood the surface with too much paint and you're gonna have some chemical adhesion problems. So nice, thin, light, wet coats is the way to go. About 15 PSI. I tend to drop my MAC valve and lower that pressure in the 10 to 12 range most days, particularly with smaller pieces where I'm holding them in my hand and they're about an inch away from each other in terms of distance. And same thing that I'm doing here. I've made a little bit of a lighter shade of gray because I'm repainting this to kind of demonstrate this process of chipping that we're going to do here. We're going to do some hairspray chipping a little bit later too as well. So I'm just repainting this demo piece that's kind of been around the table a few times. And what I want to do here with the chipping is just discuss with everybody. The red primer underneath is a catalyzed primer. It's when you do the process with Mission Models primer, it's catalyzed. That means it's impervious to both water and alcohol. And then that also allows us to take the paint on top and just to brush with some simple water like all the other chipping process and just chip away. It's not a flaky chip though. And the beauty of this system that I really appreciate is it's perfect for really old vehicles, stuff that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years, because that's kind of what this project turned into of a proposed post-war RSO tractor and say like forestry service or something like that. But this paint's great because what you can do, it goes down a beautiful matte coat, and then when you chip it like this, you get this beautiful burnished kind of metallic look to it, and that's a wonderful effect right there. That's perfect for any kind of aged situation you might have with the machine. Perfect way to go. So really happy with that, but we also wanted to get into the next step. What did I want to showcase next before this project moves into the red phase? The in-between color was a Dunkelgelb, and what I really wanted to do was demonstrate how I achieved the chipping on the 48 scale pack wagon from Tank Art 1. That's one of my, one of the more well-known pieces that I've done over my career. So talking about how I did that and bringing that out with the hairspray and everything like that. But I wanted to replicate it with Mission Models to showcase how to do that. So we've got our kind of base setup down here. But before I get to that, I want to throw a little bit more chipping into the gray, distress this paint out a little bit more before we spray the Dunkelgelb. So again, there's no hairspray in between at this point in time. And all I'm really showing is just the Mission chipping with the red primer underneath and then some fresh panzer gray on top. One of the beautiful things of this paint is if you have a darker color underneath, which is what you saw before, you can take your brush like this, and as you kind of grind that side bristles down, what that does is that rubs off the lighter post-shaded color, and then it starts to reveal the darker original color, which is what happens in the real world. So it's a great replication of that process. And then as it starts to wear through the grays, it starts to pull out the red underneath, which is also what you see with multiple layer paint as it goes through its age process. It's a wonderful way to replicate patina. With that said, this went pretty nice. We were happy with the results of this, but now it was time to throw it in. And you can see the burnishing there. That's one of the powerful things of this paint, that beautiful matte into a burnish as you buff it with the bristles during the chipping process. That's worth its weight in gold. But I wanted to throw down some Dunkelgelb, and I wanted to put this in over hairspray. So this was kind of part 2 of this conversation, because a lot of people asked me about using hairspray with mission models. It's a touchy subject in terms of, if you're not aware of how this works, it's going to trip you up. And so the reason for that is, as you watch me here mix up the Dunkelgelb 2 or 3 times to get that consistency right. And again, this is just a repeat visually for everybody how I mix my paint. I'm always going with the side cup drip to make sure that it runs down properly. And that's a good thinning ratio visually. It's about 20 to 30%, somewhere in that ballpark range. And I do this for all the paint. You know, that kind of visual runoff there, that drop down the side of the cup, as long as it moves, evenly, no problems. But alcohol is the main thing in hairspray. I recommend the fine mist spray, the low medium holds. And then 1 even coat for mission models versus the 2 even coats for the lacquers. So that's the bigger change with hairspray. And then also make sure it's completely fully dry. And then what we want to do is we're going to throw down some paint on top of this. And with the mission paint, the thing, and I recommend this painting process for all the brands anyway, but just be very careful with this one. You don't want to hit this too wet or with too much paint out of the gate. You want to get a nice, light, even coat at first. And I've spent some time here on stream adjusting this airbrush. And we actually had quite a few airbrushing problems on that stream, to be honest with you. But we fought our way through that, which is kind of typical sometimes with airbrushing. It's always going to be the one tool we have problems with. That said, really key to lay down a nice, light, even coat. And I didn't care if it was a little shitty. I'm going for distress, decades old paint job. Anyway, I'm not really looking for perfection. I want really thin, almost transparent paint here. And that reason is it really helps with our chipping. If you go too opaque with your paint, particularly a vinyl acrylic or a latex acrylic, like a Vallejo or a Life Color, if you go too thick, you won't be able to chip it. Beauty of mission, it goes down really thin, thinner than most. Thinner than a lacquer even. So if you build up your opacity and control, you can do some beautiful chipping later, which I'll show you here in a second. But first I got to throw down a little bit of a two-tone color. I get a little bit savage, throw some green in the brush. And pro tip on this one, if you're using 3-tone German camo in particular, or if you do multiple color camo, take your lightest color as your base color, throw your camo into that light color, and that'll harmonize all your colors as you go. So the Dunkelgelb's in the green, and if I was doing a red brown, it would be in the red brown as well. It's kind of my lightning agent. This kind of harmonizes everything. It gives you a really nice, beautiful color when you're doing multiple color camouflages like this, especially field applied ones. I don't want factory perfection here. I want kind of a crew doing this at a field depot, kind of conversation. And that's what I'm really trying to replicate here. So, but you can see just throwing down some nice, easy green. It's really thin. It's all in control. I've got my hands braced. I'm probably spraying about 8 to 10 PSI. I crank the PSI down even lower. Again, I recommend everybody getting MAC valves on your airbrushes. They really make a big difference with this. Allows you to kind of control this on the fly. But now we're ready to chip. I'm pretty happy with this. And let's get into the heart of this stream before we get to the red, which will come in part 2 of the video series on this one. Yeah, everybody's favorite. It's mine. I love it. Always start in a spot that's easy to control. I say that a lot because I don't want everybody out there understanding that, don't start on the difficult parts. Start on a nice easy corner like this. You can see how beautiful this goes, how gentle I'm being, how little water's employed. And I'm moving the piece, I'm moving the brush around, I'm changing up my direction, both for the shape of the details I'm trying to chip. I'm also doing this live, so I'm talking while I'm doing this. So there is a little bit of camera blur every now and then as we're moving back and forth, as it tries to keep up with me. But this is just pretty simple, straightforward chipping 101. The trick to mission models chipping, whether it has hairspray or not, and I'll talk about that again in a second as well, is delicacy is the name of the game. Keep your water in control is the name of the game. They also sell a wonderful product called polyurethane additive, and you can play with the polys and put your polys in your paint. The polyurethane additive turns the paint into a urethane, and it will then resist the water, and you can chip it in a different way. I wanted this really fine, distressed, scratchy chipping look of age vehicle. This is not World War II combat, and just want to make sure that when you guys are watching this, that's understood. We're doing a long-term project here of a vehicle been around in service for a long time. So I'm over chipping this in general. This is actually kind of like civilian construction equipment style chipping. what I'm trying to achieve here. But change up your brushes, change up the tools, and when you need scratches, what you want to do is, I use, to me, a stir stick. The chrome steel is really effective with this because it doesn't tear the paint. I find wood and toothpicks and stuff of this nature can tear. Sometimes airbrush needles are really good too. I find them a little bit scary. They're really sharp, and this isn't as sharp, so it's a little bit of a less risk with this tool, which is why I prefer it. And then when I do that, I'll put a scratch down, and then I'll pull in the brush, and I'll kind of open it up a little bit with the brush, and that kind of helps define the scratches on the surface a little bit. And you can get as detailed with that as you want, obviously with whatever your project is. But this process is really stable. It's really efficient if you understand the parameters, particularly this water-based paint. The main thing is really with the alcohol. Just be careful of it. It's not a 100% black or white conversation. It's easy to control if you control the water. The water is the critical element here, because the paint itself is erasable. It reacts to water. So if you control that, you can control your chipping, and that's really the secret to Mission Models chipping. But it works well with hairsprays we see here. Really happy with kind of how this kind of flaked off look started to happen. But we had big plans. I kind of decided to take this in an entirely different direction. So if you're looking for kind of a nice combination of 1943 into 44 with an early RSO, here you go. And stick around for part 2, because we're going to get into the Mecha Dial project quite a bit. This is a big piece of that pie. It's going to turn red if you don't know. It's in the thumbnail. And again, that was all in the live streams too. But thank you guys. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and we'll see you on the next one.